She didn't know it was the last night of her life as a ghost. She only knew the oppressive weight of the midnight blue velvet curtains and the cloying sweetness of jasmine perfume that clung to the air like a shroud. The grand hall of the citadel was a galaxy of shimmering stars, and she was a speck of dust caught in its orbit. Crystal chandeliers dripped honeyed light onto silks and satins dyed in the colors of jewels: emerald, ruby, sapphire. Laughter, sharp and brittle, cut through the low thrum of the orchestra. It was the night of the Maiden's Bloom, the annual auction where daughters of the noble houses were presented, their dowries and alliances bartered for in a delicate, cruel dance of power. Alara was not part of the dance. She was a shadow stitched to the wall, her dress the color of ash, a borrowed thing that was a size too large in the shoulders and a fraction too short at the hem. It was a servant's dress, meant for invisibility. Her stepmother, Lady Isolde, had insisted she attend, not out of kindness, but as a form of exquisite punishment, a reminder of all she was not and all she would never be. "Stand up straight, child." Isolde's voice was a silken lash against her ear. "You represent this house, even in your simplicity." The word was a calculated insult, polished and smooth. Alara straightened her spine, the familiar ache of humiliation settling deep in her bones. She kept her gaze fixed on a point on the marble floor, a place where two veins of gray intersected like a scar. It was easier than looking at her stepsister Lyra. Lyra was the centerpiece of their family's ambition. Tonight, she was breathtaking, a vision in emerald green that made her auburn hair burn like fire. Her smile was a knife wrapped in silk, and it was aimed squarely at Alara. "Oh, Mother, don't be so harsh," Lyra said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the surrounding lords and ladies. "She's trying her best. It's not her fault she's plain, like a field sparrow trying to sing with nightingales." A few titters followed the remark. Alara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a flush of shame that was as familiar as her own heartbeat. She didn't look up. She didn't give them the satisfaction. She had learned long ago that her silence was her only shield. Inside, she was a ruin, but her exterior was a fortress of quiet dignity she had built stone by painful stone. She was nobody. A daughter from her father's first marriage, a woman whose own mother had possessed no title, no fortune, only a kind heart and a talent for painting that had died with her. Alara had inherited the talent, but she kept it hidden, her charcoal sketches tucked beneath a loose floorboard in her small attic room. They were her only real possessions. "The bidding will begin soon," Isolde said, her eyes scanning the room with predatory focus. "Lord Valerius has already expressed his interest in Lyra. His estates border ours. It would be the perfect match." "He's so old," Lyra pouted, though her eyes gleamed with triumph. "But his coffers are deep. I suppose I can endure it." She glanced at Alara again, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "At least someone will bid on me. Can you imagine putting our little mouse on the block? The silence would be deafening. Nobody will bid on you." The words were meant to break her. They almost did. Alara's fortress trembled, the stones threatening to crumble. She felt a tear prick the corner of her eye and fought it back with a ferocity born of long practice. She would not cry. Not here. She didn't know that from across the room, in the deepest shadows of a velvet-draped alcove, a king was watching. He had already refused 17 noble daughters. King Theron of the northern wastes sat with a goblet of untouched wine in his hand, his presence a void of silence in the glittering chaos. He was a man forged from winter and iron, the Alpha King whose lands were harsh and whose people were fiercely loyal. He had not wanted to come. The southern courts were a nest of vipers dressed in silk, their smiles as false as their pedigrees. But his council had insisted. An alliance was needed. A queen was required. His eyes, the color of a storm-darkened sea, swept over the room with a boredom that bordered on contempt. He saw the preening peacocks, the simpering maidens, the greedy fathers. He saw the same empty ambition in every face. It was a suffocating, predictable performance. And then he saw her. She was standing near a marble column, a sliver of gray against a tapestry of vibrant color. She was like a moth that had wandered into a gathering of butterflies. While every other woman in the room strained to be seen, she seemed to be actively trying to disappear, to fold herself into the shadows until she became nothing at all. But he saw her. He saw the rigid set of her spine, the quiet defiance in the tilt of her head as she stared at the floor. He saw the subtle clenching of her jaw as the woman beside her spoke, and the way the beautiful girl in green looked at her with a casual cruelty that made his lip curl in distaste. He watched as the girl in gray absorbed the insult, her face a pale, still mask. But he saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, a deep, ancient sorrow that she tried to hide from the world. In that flicker, he saw more strength than in all the boisterous lords and laughing ladies combined. Something shifted inside him. A string long dormant was plucked. It resonated with a low, powerful hum that vibrated through his very soul. For years he had felt a profound loneliness, a weariness that came from being surrounded by people who wanted something from him, but never truly saw him. He was a king, a symbol, a prize. He looked at the girl in gray, and for the first time in a decade, he felt seen, though she had never once lifted her eyes in his direction. It was a strange, inexplicable pull. A fated thread winding its way across the crowded room, tying his gaze to hers. He felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness, a primal urge to stride across the marble, to shield that fragile, powerful light from the vipers who sought to extinguish it. The auctioneer stepped onto the dais, his voice booming through the hall. "My lords and ladies, let the maiden's bloom commence." Theron leaned forward slightly, his entire focus narrowing to the small figure by the column. He watched her flinch at the auctioneer's voice, a barely perceptible tremor. The performance was about to begin, and he, the bored king, suddenly found himself intensely interested in the outcome. He felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, a prickling on his skin as if lightning was about to strike. It was the feeling of recognition, the undeniable sense of a lock finding its key. The hunt was over. He had found her. The first few names were called, daughters of dukes and barons, presented with flowery descriptions of their virtues and the hefty sums of their dowries. Bids were exchanged like volleys in a battle. Alara kept her eyes down, counting the patterns in the marble. 1, 2, 3, a spiral. 1, 2, 3, 4, a starburst. It was a game she played to keep the panic at bay. Then the auctioneer's voice rang out with a name that made her heart stop. And now, the jewel of the House of Arden, the lovely Lady Lyra. Lyra ascended the dais, her emerald gown catching the light. She was radiant. She curtsied, her smile practiced and perfect. The room buzzed with approval. Isolde gripped Alara's arm, her nails digging into the thin fabric of her sleeve. "Watch this, girl. This is what it means to be of value." The bidding for Lyra began. Lord Valerius opened with a handsome sum. Another lord countered. The numbers climbed, each bid a testament to Lyra's beauty and her family's connections. Alara felt a dizzying wave of nausea. This was her sister, being sold like a prize mare. And yet, Lyra reveled in it. This was her triumph. Suddenly, Lyra's eyes found Alara in the crowd. With everyone's attention on her, she leaned toward the auctioneer and whispered something. He chuckled and raised his hand for silence. "An amusing jest from the Lady Lyra," he announced. "She suggests that after her, we should auction off her charming stepsister, though she fears the bids would be made in copper, not gold." The room erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, echoing sound that crashed over Alara in waves. This was the final, public humiliation. Her shield shattered. Her fortress crumbled. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, pitying, mocking. Her breath hitched, and the tears she had fought so hard against finally escaped, tracing a cold path down her hot cheek. It was then that a shadow detached itself from the alcove. A figure moved through the crowd, and the crowd parted for him as if by divine command. The laughter died in people's throats, replaced by gasps of shock and awe. Lords and ladies scrambled to bow, to curtsy, their faces pale with astonishment. He was tall, broader than any man Alara had ever seen, dressed in black wool and leather that seemed to absorb the light. His presence was a physical force, a silent storm that commanded the absolute attention of the entire hall. His face was all harsh lines and sharp angles, his cheekbones high, his jaws set, and his eyes, the color of a winter sea, were fixed on her. Only on her. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the scent of pine and cold, clean air clinging to his clothes. She was forced to crane her neck to look up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He ignored her stepmother, who was stammering a greeting. He ignored her stepsister, whose jaw had dropped in disbelief. He looked only at Alara, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were looking directly into her soul, seeing all the broken pieces she kept hidden there. His voice was low, a rumble like distant thunder or gravel wrapped in velvet. It cut through the stunned silence of the room. "What is your name?" Her own voice was a thread of sound, barely a whisper. All the fight had gone out of her. "It does not matter." A flicker of something, not pity, but something deeper, something akin to understanding, passed through his eyes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a devastatingly sad and beautiful thing. "It matters to me," he said. He extended a large, gloved hand. It was a gesture of offering, of rescue. "Come with me." Alara stared at his hand. It was a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of her despair. To take it would be an act of rebellion she had never dared to contemplate. To refuse it would be to sink back into the cold, familiar darkness. Behind him, she could see Lyra's face, contorted with a mixture of fury and confusion. She could see Isolde, her expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. For the first time in her life, Alara made a choice for herself. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her own hand, small and trembling, and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and warm. The contact was electric, a jolt of life that shot up her arm and straight to her heart. He didn't pull her. He simply waited, his grip a silent promise of safety. She took a step, leaving the shadows of the column behind. She left her stepmother and stepsister behind. With his hand holding hers, she walked with him, away from the auction block, away from the whispers and the stares. He led her not back into the crowd, but through a small, unmarked door behind a tapestry. The noise of the ballroom faded, replaced by the hushed quiet of a long stone corridor lit by flickering torches. The air grew cooler. It smelled of old stone and beeswax. He led her to a small, secluded balcony, a crescent of marble that overlooked the castle's sleeping gardens. The moon was a perfect silver coin in a sky of midnight velvet, and the air was scented with night-blooming jasmine, a scent that was pure and clean, nothing like the cloying perfume of the hall. He released her hand, though the warmth of his touch lingered on her skin. He leaned against the balustrade, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were softer, but no less powerful. The silver light caught in his dark hair and traced the sharp line of his jaw. For a long moment, there was only silence. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a peaceful one, a respite. Alara found she could breathe again, the tight knot of anxiety in her chest slowly beginning to unwind. "I'm nobody," she whispered into the quiet, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was the truth she had been fed her entire life, the one she had come to believe. You shouldn't have done that. They will be angry." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Let them be angry." His voice was still that low, resonant rumble. "I have been watching you, not just tonight. I arrived at this citadel 3 days ago. I have seen you in the gardens, tending the roses. I have seen you in the library, your head bent over a book. I have seen how you move when you think no one is looking, like you are apologizing for taking up space in the world." Alara's breath caught in her throat. He had seen her. All this time, when she had felt most invisible, he had seen her. "You are not nobody," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "You are the only person in that entire farcical gathering who possesses an ounce of truth. They are all playing a part. You are simply being. In a world of polished stones, you are a diamond in the rough." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of a strange, fragile hope she hadn't dared to feel in years. "You don't know me. I know your strength," he said, his voice softening. "I saw the way you withstood their cruelty. I saw you carry your pain with a grace they could never comprehend. That is a strength greater than any army." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I know what it is to be lonely in a crowd. I have been searching for something, Alara. I was not sure what. A reason, a partner, an anchor in a sea of lies. Tonight, watching you, I think my search may be over." It was too much. The words were too beautiful, too kind. A fantasy spun from moonlight. She shook her head, a gesture of disbelief. "But who are you? Why would you, for me?" He reached up and unclasped the heavy, dark cloak at his throat. He let it fall to the stone, revealing the tunic beneath. It was simple, black wool, but embroidered on the chest in silver thread was a sigil she recognized from books and legends. A snarling dire wolf's head, crowned with iron, the sigil of the Northern King. Alara's world tilted on its axis. This was not just some powerful lord. This was Theron, the Alpha King, a man of myth and fear, ruler of the unforgiving North. A king who had never taken a wife, who was said to have a heart made of ice. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her mouth. The sheer, terrifying gulf between their stations was a chasm that could swallow her whole. She was a nameless, landless orphan. He was a king. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp but not unkind. He saw the fear in her eyes, and it seemed to wound him. "Do not look at me like that. That title means nothing. It is a cage, just as your circumstances are a cage. Do you think I enjoy that room full of sycophants? Do you think I want a queen who measures her worth in acres of land or chests of gold? I want one who measures it in the strength of her heart." He took a step toward her, closing the distance she had created. He reached out, not to take her hand, but to gently brush the tear track from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to his formidable appearance. "My name is Theron," he said simply, "and I would know yours." "Elara," she whispered, the name feeling foreign on her own tongue. It had been so long since anyone had asked for it with sincerity. "Elara," he repeated, and the way he said it, it sounded like a prayer. "It's beautiful." Before she could process the maelstrom of emotions, fear, shock, a terrifying, burgeoning hope, the door to the balcony burst open. Lady Isolde stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. Behind her, Lyra's expression was a venomous mix of jealousy and disbelief. 2 household guards flanked them. "There you are!" Isolde snapped, her voice shaking with rage. She completely ignored the king, her eyes fixed on Elara with a look of pure hatred. "How dare you? You will come with us now. The shame you have brought upon this house tonight will not be forgotten." Lyra stepped forward, her green dress seeming to hiss. "Running off with a stranger? Have you no decency? I knew you were nothing but gutter trash." "That is enough." Theron's voice was no longer soft. It was the crack of a glacier breaking, a sound of absolute, unquestionable authority. Isolde and Lyra froze, finally turning their full attention to the man standing with Elara. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of panic. Isolde's face went white. She dropped into a deep, trembling curtsy. "Your Majesty," she stammered. "1,000 pardons. We did not... We were just retrieving our ward." Theron did not acknowledge her apology. He stepped in front of Elara, shielding her with his body. "That way again. You will not speak to her that way again. You will not speak to her at all." He took Elara's hand again, his grip firm and reassuring. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the 2 guards. They flinched and averted their eyes, as if his stare was a physical blow. He led Elara back toward the door. "We are returning to the ballroom," he said, his voice resonating with power. "This misunderstanding needs to be rectified. Publicly." Walking back into the grand hall was entirely different from the first time. Now, she was not a ghost. She was at the side of a king. The silence was absolute, the air thick with tension. Every eye was on them. Theron led her not to the shadows, but to the very center of the room, directly before the auctioneer's dais, where Lyra had stood just moments before. Lyra and Isolde followed, their faces a mixture of terror and impotent rage. Theron stopped and turned to face the assembly. His voice needed no amplification. It filled every corner of the vast hall, clear and cold as a winter morning. "You have all witnessed a display of casual cruelty tonight," he began, his stormy eyes sweeping across the crowd. "You have witnessed a good and gentle soul be mocked for the entertainment of the shallow." You laughed. A wave of shame rippled through the room. Lords and ladies who had chuckled at Lyra's jest now stared at the floor, their faces burning. "The House of Arden," Theron continued, his gaze landing on Isolde and Lyra, who visibly shrank, "has shown its true quality. It is a house built on vanity and malice. It is a house I will have no alliance with." The collective gasp was audible. He had just publicly and utterly ruined them. Their ambitions, their perfect match with Lord Valerius, their social standing, all of it turned to dust by his words. Isolde, desperate, made one last foolish attempt. "Your Majesty, you don't understand. This girl, she is nothing. Her mother was a commoner, a painter with no name, no dowry." Theron's laughter was a short, harsh sound, devoid of humor. "You think that matters to me? You think I, who rule a kingdom of stone and ice, care for the trinkets of the south? You offer me polished glass when I have found a flawless diamond." He turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He faced the auctioneer, who looked as if he might faint. "The bidding for Lady Lyra is closed," Theron declared. "There are no offers." He then turned to Alara, and in front of the entire court, his expression softened. The fearsome king vanished, replaced by a man looking at the center of his world. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "But the auction is not over," he said, his voice now a tender murmur meant only for her, yet heard by all in the breathless silence. He looked back at the auctioneer. "I wish to make a bid." The auctioneer stammered, For whom, Your Majesty?" Theron's eyes never left Alara's. "For her. For Alara." And what is your price, Your Majesty?" He smiled then, a true, breathtaking smile that transformed his harsh features into something magnificent. "I name my price," he said, his voice ringing with absolute sincerity. "My kingdom, my name, my entire life." He lowered his head and he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was acclaiming. It was fierce and full of promise, a fire in the winter of her life. It was the sealing of a vow, a declaration made not just to her, but to the entire world. In that single, breathtaking moment, Alara was no longer invisible. She was not a ghost, not a mouse, not a nobody. She was a queen. And as she kissed him back, a lifetime of pain and loneliness washed away, replaced by the staggering, impossible, beautiful truth of being found. Later, in a suite of rooms so luxurious they made her head spin, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a trembling vulnerability in its wake. The rooms were furnished in the northern style. Dark, polished wood, heavy furs, and a roaring fire that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. It felt safe, solid, real. Theron had dismissed the servants, leaving them in blessed privacy. He had poured her a cup of warm, spiced tea, his large hands surprisingly deft. She sat on a plush fur rug before the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones, chasing away the last of the chill from the grand hall. He sat not on a chair, but on the rug beside her, giving her space but remaining close enough that she could feel his comforting presence. "Is this real?" she whispered, staring into the flames. The question was for herself as much as for him. Her life had been turned upside down in the space of an hour. It felt like a dream she was terrified to wake from. "It is as real as this fire," he answered, his voice gentle. "As real as my hand in yours." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His touch was an anchor. "I know this is sudden. I know it is overwhelming." She turned to look at him, truly look at him, away from the prying eyes of the court. His face in the firelight was a landscape of strength and unexpected kindness. There were lines of weariness around his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. "Why?" she asked again, the word full of a lifetime of confusion. "Why me? You could have anyone, any princess, any duchess. Why choose nothing?" The word slipped out, a relic of her old life. Theron's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Do not say that," he commanded. But there was no anger in his voice, only a deep, resounding sorrow that she could ever think so little of herself. "Alara, my life has been one of duty, of obligation, of endless political maneuvering. I am surrounded by people who want my power, my title, my wealth. They show me a carefully constructed version of themselves, a mask they think I want to see." He shifted, turning more fully toward her. "For 3 days, I have watched you. I saw you share your bread with a stray dog in the kitchens. I saw you rescue a fallen baby bird and gently place it back in its nest. I saw you endure the taunts of your family with a spine of steel. You have more character, more worth in your little finger than they have in their entire bloodline. What I saw in you was not nothing. It was everything I have ever searched for. He let out a long breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. I am weary, Elara. Weary of the masks. You have no mask. You are just you. And that is more precious than any dowry. She believed him. In the quiet intimacy of this room, with the firelight dancing in his sea-dark eyes, she believed every word. The hope that had been so fragile on the balcony began to take root, to grow strong and steady in the warm soil of his sincerity. I am afraid, she confessed, her voice small. I don't know how to be what you want. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't want you to be a queen, he said, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. I just want you to be Elara. Be the woman who tends roses and reads books. Be the woman who shows kindness to strays. The rest is just noise. I will handle the noise. All I ask is that you stand by my side and let me stand by yours. He was offering her not just a title, but a partnership, a life, a home. My home is in the north, he said, his eyes full of a new light. It is a harsh land, but a beautiful one. It is honest. The mountains do not lie. The winter snows are clean. I think you would love it there. It is a place where things of true substance are valued. Strength, loyalty, kindness. You will not be just my queen. You will be beloved. Section. He was offering her a future she had never, in her wildest dreams, dared to imagine for herself. A life where she would be seen, cherished, and protected. The last of her fear dissolved, replaced by a feeling so vast and overwhelming, it stole her breath. It was love. A sudden, powerful, undeniable love for this Winter King who had seen the light in her when all she had known was darkness. Yes, she whispered. It was the easiest word she had ever spoken. Yes, Theron. His answering smile was the breaking of a dawn she had thought would never come. 6 months later. The air in the northern capital of Winterfell was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and the distant promise of snow. It was a scent Elara had come to love. It was the scent of home. She stood in the center of a vast, sun-drenched glass house, a structure of her own design that she had convinced Theron's skeptical master builders to construct against the southern wall of the citadel. They had called it a folly, a fragile southern fancy that would never survive a true northern winter. But it had. And now, it was thriving. Inside, against all odds, roses bloomed. Not the pale, delicate things from the south, but hardy, vibrant breeds she had cultivated herself. Their petals the color of blood and fire against the snow-dusted landscape visible through the glass. It was her sanctuary. But it was also more than that. It was the Royal Conservatory, a place where she taught the arts of horticulture, painting, and calligraphy to any of the castle's staff and city's people who wished to learn. Her first students had been timid, unsure what to make of this quiet queen who preferred dirt under her fingernails to jewels on her fingers. But her gentle patience and genuine passion had won them over. Now the glass house was always filled with the low murmur of conversation and the bright, unfamiliar sound of her own laughter. She was dressed in a simple gown of deep blue wool, her hair braided with a few late-blooming winter blossoms. A smudge of charcoal was on her cheek from the sketch she had been working on. She was happier than she had ever thought possible. The ghost of the girl in the gray dress was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with her title. The door to the glass house opened, and Theron entered. He moved with the same quiet power she had first witnessed in the ballroom. But now, when he looked at her, his face was open, his eyes filled with a deep and abiding tenderness. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice a warm rumble. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Where else would I be?" Aelin is finally getting the hang of shading. Her charcoals of the mountain peaks are magnificent. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze falling on the sketch she had been working on. A portrait of him, captured in a rare moment of unguarded laughter. "And what of the Queen's work?" he murmured, his lips brushing her temple. "It is also magnificent." She leaned back into his embrace, a comfortable, familiar gesture that felt as natural as breathing. It is easy to capture a subject when you love him so much. He held her for a long, peaceful moment, the two of them looking out at the stark beauty of his kingdom. Her kingdom now, too. "A letter arrived from the south," he said after a while, his tone carefully neutral. Alara stiffened slightly. She rarely heard news from her old life, and she had never once asked for it. "It's from your stepsister," he added. He held it out for her. The parchment was fine, the seal of the House of Arden broken. She took it, her fingers tracing the once proud sigil. She had half a mind to throw it into the brazier unread. But a quiet curiosity, and the knowledge that she was no longer the girl who could be wounded by their words, made her open it. The letter was a pathetic, pleading thing. After Theron's public denouncement, their house had fallen into ruin. Lord Valerius had withdrawn his offer. Old allies had deserted them. They were socially and financially bankrupt. Lyra wrote of their hardships, of her mother's bitterness, and begged for the Queen's forgiveness and, more pointedly, her aid. Alara read the looping, desperate script and felt nothing. No anger, no triumph. Only a distant, quiet pity for a girl who had been taught that her value lay only in her face and her fortune, and had now lost both. The words that once would have shattered her were now just ink on paper. A dispatch from a foreign land she had no desire to ever visit again. Her past no longer had a hold on her. She folded the letter and placed it on a nearby table. She would send them a modest, anonymous purse of coin, an act of charity, not of forgiveness. It was all they deserved. Her life was here now. She turned in Theron's arms, wrapping her own around his neck. She looked up into his face, into the stormy sea of his eyes that had become her favorite harbor. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked puzzled. "For what? I brought you bad news?" "No," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You brought me a reminder of the ghost I was and the woman you saw. Thank you for seeing me, Theron." He lowered his head, his forehead resting against hers. "Always, Alara," he vowed, his voice husky. "For the rest of my life, I will see you." He kissed her then, a kiss that was not a claiming, but a homecoming. It was a kiss of equals, of partners, of two souls who had been lost and had, against all odds, found their way to each other. In the quiet of the glass house, surrounded by the impossible roses she had coaxed from the frozen earth, the overlooked jewel and the weary king had found there forever. And it was more beautiful than any fairy tale.